Hi everybody, I'm Bill Sanders and this is Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection. Today we're going to talk about chronographs, and as a person who is not the biggest fan of chronographs, there's certain things not only to like about them, but to greatly admire about them. One thing that in putting this video together, one thing I began to recognize, they have one of the prettiest movements. I mean, you look at a chronograph movement and there's a whole orchestra of things going on as different types of gears and clutches come together. They're really something. This particular one, the Omega's Speedmaster with the 3861 movement, is it's almost an ideal, to me anyway, chronograph in terms of all of the elements of it. And to me, the best part is that it's hand wound, it's not automatic, and so you don't have some big rotor going around blocking what you can see, because that is, I think, a very important part. But let me go over this. Apparently I'm not the only one who complains about chronographs. These are some common complaints. Some of them are not my complaints. I got this from, there was a magazine article in Pen and Quill, no, Quill and Pad, that's it, in Quill and Pad. And these were the things that were listed. There was poor legibility, that I think is the big one for me. Multiple dials, again, this leads to poor legibility. All you want to do is check the time, like this one. This is one of my, I think, 2 chronographs. And you check the time, and you got to make sure that the hands aren't mixed in with the subdials and so forth. Analog minute indicators. I mean, for these little bitty indicators here, just to indicate what the minute is. Again, poor legibility. Now there's something I'm going to talk about more, and this is the horizontal clutch. And this leads to a stutter of the hands, and we'll see why. It's a very interesting thing, at least in my opinion. There are variations in power requirements. Now there's a lot going on. Now remember, your entire watch is being, the unwinding of a mainspring has to deal with all of these different things. You add on top of that, if you add a chronograph, it's got even more stuff to deal with. The vertical clutch, this was a solution to the horizontal clutch and the stutter requirement. Well, it's more expensive. Also, too, I don't think it's as pretty. That's another story. They're excessively strong forces. You need a stronger spring to really run a chronograph, because it's got more stuff going on. You have shocks that you can have to it when these gears come clashing together and they come apart, and these things happen. So you got a shock to deal with. The automatic ones, and the reason that I'm not crazy about automatics, my much loved Daniel Roth is an automatic with a El Primero in it. So it's got an automatic, and I look at it, and I'll take a look at that in a second. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Finally, it conceals that, but also the automatic winding is noisy. My hearing's shot. The noise doesn't bother me. Like I said, not all of these things are an issue with me. And this is probably why the kinds of your common chronographs, the Speedmasters, the 3861 is one of my favorite. Now, it's just as in that respect. Now, another one of my favorite is the El Primero, because that happens to be what I have. Now, there's 2 kinds. I have the 400. The 400 El Primero was in my watch. There's one the newer one is the 3600. You have the column wheel that activates the clutch. And then you have the 4th wheel on the 400, that's like mine, that activates the chronograph. On the 3600, you have a pinion on the escapement, which is where you get your activation from. To me, I don't know. That was it's very scary to have anything on the escapement activating anything else, because you've got the gear going directly, the pinion going right up to the chronograph gearing. So that's what it is. Now here's my watch, my Daniel Roth Masters chronograph, caliber DR400. The DR400 I think is a polished El Primero 400. It's a great watch, but I mean, it's got a lot of the problems that you have in your typical lateral clutches. That's hard to start there. And once it gets started, and you have to stop it, and then you have reset to it, and it goes through all of these things. So there's a lot of work and a lot of little shocks and so on and so forth going on in anybody's chronograph. And I took a look at some common, and some of these are stereotypical, others are interesting for other reasons. Rolex Daytona, in my opinion, is probably the most famous chronograph. That's no news to just about anybody. One of my favorite is a Parmigiani Fleurier Tanda Chroner Anniversary Rattrapant. A Rattrapant is also probably best known as a split second, because it's got 2 second chronograph hands, and you can set one and then you set the other, and you can, let's say you're timing 2 runners or 2 horses or something like that, whatever you use a rattrapant for. This Gronfeld 1941 chronograph tantalum. This is sort of interesting. I think they were the guys doing it. Somebody was asking Carol Forestier Casapi, who was, I think, the 2012 winner of the Watchmaker of the Year. She developed all of these great movements for Cartier. And they were asking her about, she said something really funny about, she said, is it more difficult to develop a chronograph or a tourbillon? And apparently she looked at him and said, are you kidding? A tourbillon, anyone can do a tourbillon. Chronograph is really hard. So I think a lot of chronograph collectors probably have a much more complex movement elements than they realize. Another couple more, the Vacheron Constantin Overseas, sort of a common luxury sports with a chronograph. One that's far more affordable and probably one of the more common movements is a Hamilton chronograph, Khaki X-Win GMT with an ETA 7750 in it. Now, all of these have a similar kind of setup of one or two types. Here you have two gears. You have the gears sitting here, and when you have a horizontal clutch, what happens is that this guy is spinning all along, and then it just sort of bangs into it. And what happens is that when the gears are getting ready to connect, you'll see a little stuttering. The hands will go something like that, because this guy is moving and this one's not. And that's been sort of a kind of problem. One solution to that is to use friction. And this is, you have these perfectly round gearless ones. Unfortunately, mine has a little lump in it, but you get the idea, is that this thing is going and comes into this, and it's not going to have a problem because they're smooth. You don't have the gears trying to set up with each other. And if you look at the gears that come together in a chronograph, these pointy ones like that. Now, so they've been living with that problem. It doesn't really matter that much whether you have a column wheel or a cam lever to start the things off. Probably a column wheel is a little nicer looking. Some think, some like the cam lever. But the important thing is either both of them set the clutch. And so once the old clutch is engaged, that's where you really have your issues going on, is either with the horizontal or the vertical clutch. Now, in the vertical clutch, everything is already together. I mean, there's no separation of the chronograph gear train from the main gear train. So it's already there, and so it's simply a matter of kicking something to get the whole get that going, but it's already part of a going train. Okay, now the big change came, I think, around 2015 or something in that era, with something called the Chronograph movement. Now, all of those features that I talked about, the difficult to see and cluttered and so on and so forth, one of the first ones that came out was called the Singer Reimagined Track 1. And this had this new Chronograph movement that was a very different kind of chronograph. I'll show you with my little things here in a bit. And it looked like a regular clock. Maybe it's got a little more numbers than we're used to. But what it is that it's a chronograph, but instead of having all these little subdials and things, you have the columns, or not the column, but the disc moving around for different kinds of time. And then when you set the chronograph, I mean, if you look at the chronograph start and stop, they're not too different from some others, but they'll start the chronograph that will be moving the second hand for the minute hand and then for the hour hand on that one. Fabergé came out with something called the Visionaire chronograph, also using this Chronograph movement. By the way, the Chronograph movement was by Agenhor, and the head of Agenhor, who developed it originally, is Jean-Marc Wiederreck, who developed both the movement and Agenhor itself. And if you look at that, you can see is that on the outer ring, you can see the hour and the minute hands, those little white things. And then in the center with the little red tipped ones, those are the chronograph. Using sort of the space that's being used is in a very different way than the other, than your typical chronograph. Now, at the bottom center is H. Moser's Streamliner flyback chronograph, automatic. The interesting thing about it is that, first of all, it's an automatic, which is doesn't go with your typical chronograph. I mean, with your typical Chronograph. And it doesn't have a chronograph hour hand. And I think for good reason. I like that idea. I say, look, you got an hour hand. I mean, first of all, most chronograph timing doesn't last an hour. You're talking about number of seconds, maybe a number of minutes, but you're not talking, generally speaking, hours. You want to talk hours? Just use a regular hour hand, keep an eye and see where it goes while your chronograph is going. So there's more than one version of the Chronograph, and the one by H. Moser, they modified it. They worked with Agenhor to do something different with it. Now, if we look at this, if we look at the Chronograph, the movement is really an amazing one. I like right in the middle, you can see it looks like a Batman bridge for Batman's head and shoulders. I don't know what that's for. But they have the main things. Again, you got a column wheel, and then you have what they call an Agen clutch. And what what he did, this is really interesting. See if I can do this right. You have, instead of having either the smooth one that you don't run into the stuttering problem with, or having the locking one, what they did is that, and this, by the way, they had two of these, and this one was about the same size. And so when the spinning one came, if it sort of hit a little bump, it would automatically go to the smooth one. And so this was one of the ways that they solved that problem with what is called the Agin clutch. And it's really been not just me, but just about everyone who understands chronographs and has worked with chronographs. This is revolutionary, and it sort of come to a point in this discussion is that this would appear to be one way that chronographs are going, and my beloved Daniel Roth chronograph and my beloved El Primero 400, they're fine. I mean, for collectors like me, I think it'd be even finer to have an Agin collection in my collection. They're a little pricey, but maybe in time someone will figure out a way to have one that are more so. Now there are like 5 different patented elements in this that are Agenhor trademarks, and they're not, nobody can just put everything together, but they need Agenhor's permission to do it, and I think it's a very worthwhile one to have. And since Agenhor is known for making movements, I don't think there's not a single watch right now today that is fully an Agenhor one. It's always made with someone else, like we saw the Singer and the one by Fabergé. Anyway, that's my view of chronographs, and I'd really like to hear what you have to think about it. This is an opportunity to subscribe if you like. Until next time, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Sci, the Art and Science of Watch Collection.